Hello, everyone. Today, we're stepping into a colder world, not just in weather, but in spirit. The Viking Age is often draped in romantic fog, long ships, thunder gods, wild freedom. But if you weren't holding the axe, you were likely beneath it. Tonight's story isn't about conquest. It's about fear. Slow, ritualized, and crafted into legend. Because torture, for the Norse, wasn't just punishment, it was theater. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time is it. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, pull the covers a little tighter. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. Today, you find yourself standing at the edge of the world. The wind here doesn't whisper, it cuts. It moves over frozen fjords and dark waters like a blade honed by time. The air tastes of salt and wood smoke, and under your worn boots the earth is hard, always damp, always remembering the last snowfall. This isn't the Viking Age you were promised. No horns on helmets, no golden halls echoing with laughter, no beer-soaked camaraderie around a roaring fire. That world lives in tales, sagas softened by centuries. But the real Viking world, it was made of harsher elements. Cold, blood, iron. And you weren't born to sail. You weren't a shield bearer or a raider clutching his axe under a northern sky. No, you were born in the quiet shadow of those who were. You lived in a village so small it didn't need a name. Just smoke rising from chimneys and the echo of oars hitting water. You heard stories, yes, of raids, of honor, of gods who demanded strength. But you also knew the price of weakness, the price of being captured, of standing on the wrong side of a grudge. The Viking world ran on fear as much as on glory. Not a loud fear, not the kind that runs through the streets screaming, but something deeper, worn into bone. The kind of fear that teaches you to step lightly, to watch who you anger, and to know what waits if you fail to walk the line. Because here, pain was more than punishment. It was language. When someone wronged a family, or defied a chieftain, or simply got in the way of power, they weren't silenced quietly. Their suffering was carved into the earth, the air, the memory of the village. You could smell it. The iron in the blood, the smoke of wet wood burning under a bound body. You could hear it. The hush that fell over a crowd before the first scream. And that scream was meant to be heard. Torture in this world wasn't hidden. It wasn't taboo. It was ritual, structured, almost sacred. A performance for gods and men alike, designed not just to punish, but to instruct, to warn, to terrify. Imagine this. You've been taken. Maybe during a raid. Maybe during a feud you didn't start. Your hands are bound, your mouth dry, your skin covered in the sweat of someone who knows what comes next. You're brought before the village, not in a cell, but in the open. Everyone watching. Children, elders, warriors. The very same people who, a day ago, might have offered you bread. Now they want a show. The chieftain, or perhaps the Godai, the spiritual keeper of the old ways, steps forward. Not with rage, but with calm, precision. You're not a person, not anymore. You're a symbol, a vessel for message and myth. The tools are old, used, but still sharp. Some were forged for this purpose alone, and the cold, it doesn't go away. In fact, it makes everything worse, slower, more real. Pain lingers longer in the cold. Blood moves sluggishly. Skin turns blue before it breaks. And there is always silence. That deep, snow-muffled silence that makes each breath, each whimper, a kind of music. The Norse were not mindless brutes. Their violence had meaning. Even in its cruelty, it followed a pattern, a code, a balance between offense and retribution, between what was done and what must be suffered. To the modern mind, this is horror. But to them, it was order. Fairness, even. Because in a world where survival meant strength, mercy could look like weakness. And weakness here could kill more than one man. It could unravel an entire village. And so, torture became theater, a sacred rhythm of scream and steel. It taught lessons without words. It said, don't betray your kin. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't forget your place, because the world is watching, and the gods are never far. This wasn't a daily occurrence, nor was it mindless cruelty. It was rare, which made it even more powerful. You didn't need many examples to understand the rules. A single morning where the wind carried the smell of charred flesh or the sound of a name being screamed until it broke. That stayed with you. You learned fast. You remembered. Because if you didn't, you might be next. And so you lived quietly, with respect, with fear tucked neatly beneath your ribs. But fear wasn't the only thing in this cold, hard world. There was also awe, a strange, unsettling admiration for those who endured, for the ones who didn't scream, who stared into the fire and didn't blink, who faced the tools and still told jokes. They became legends, not for killing, but for surviving, for taking pain and giving it silence. Because in this world, silence was power, the loudest thing you could do. Perhaps you've heard of the blood eagle, perhaps you haven't. But that tale, brutal, symbolic, and likely exaggerated, wasn't just about death. It was about making a man's end unforgettable, about turning pain into story, story into law. The Viking world was built on memory, and pain, when performed right, was unforgettable. And now, the fire is a little lower. Your breath feels slower. The night outside your window, colder. But we've only just begun. Let's take another step toward the moment when you are captured, when the fear becomes not just legend, but your reality. And now, just breathe. You weren't born under a storm god's gaze. Your arms are strong, yes, but shaped by farming, not war. You've pulled nets from icy waters, chopped wood until your shoulders burned, and carried water across frozen paths while the wind tore at your cloak. But today, none of that matters. Today, you are prey. They came at dawn, always dawn. The hour when frost clings hardest and sleep is deepest. When a village still smells of damp wool and ash. You woke not to birdsong, but to the crunch of boots outside your door. To the strange silence that settles just before violence. No horns, no speeches, just fire and steel. The attack was swift, surgical. They weren't drunk or shouting. They didn't wear animal pelts or paint their faces. They moved like a tide, disciplined and silent, each one knowing his role. And you? You were lucky, or unlucky, enough not to die immediately. You were bound, roughly but effectively. Ropes made of twisted gut, coarse wool against skin rubbed raw by the snow. Your mouth bled, not from a wound, but from the sheer clenching of your jaw. You were taken. The boat that carried you away smelled of pitch and old sweat. There were others, maybe 3, maybe 5, all with the same look in their eyes. That faraway, unfocused look that people wear when they've stepped outside their own story. Your hands were numb, your thoughts even more so. There's a myth that once you're captured, the worst has already happened. That myth is a lie. Being a prisoner in the Viking world was not a pause between battles. It was a slow unraveling. A new identity forced upon you. The identity of someone who has no right to name, to comfort, or to future. You weren't worth ransom. If you were, someone would have already paid. And they wouldn't have treated you like this, like cargo. You were being taken elsewhere. Not for profit, not for mercy, but for message. The journey was long, or maybe it was short. Time, when wrapped in fear, moved strangely. The sea was gray. The sky, lower than you remembered. The men who watched you didn't speak to you. They didn't need to. And then, one morning, the boat docked at a village unlike your own. It was bigger, colder, sharper somehow, like it had grown used to violence. Not just enduring it, but thriving on it. Children ran barefoot on frozen paths. Women chopped wood with the same focus a man might use to gut a fish. And the men looked at you as if they already knew your story. As if they had seen 100 like you and had no reason to remember another. You were brought to the center, the clearing. No one needed to announce what would happen. You knew. They knew. This was routine. You kneeled. Your knees didn't want to hold you, but there was no choice. Behind you, someone held a knife. Not for killing, not yet. Just enough to remind you. You move. You bleed. And then came the questions. They weren't shouted. They were murmured, almost kindly. Who are you? What did your people take? What gods do you pray to? It didn't matter if your answers were true. The questions weren't for you. They were for the crowd, for the gods, for the story. You tried to speak. Maybe you told the truth. Maybe you stayed silent. But the outcome was already written. Because in this world, identity didn't protect you. Nor did innocence. Only usefulness, or the performance of your suffering, gave you value now. You were stripped, slowly, not because they needed to humiliate you, but because every part of this act had meaning. Your clothes were inspected, your hands examined, your back touched as if it were a map, a canvas for something to be written. You weren't the first, and you wouldn't be the last. Others had knelt here before, had bled here, screamed here, maybe even laughed, mad with defiance. Their stories hung in the air like smoke, and you, still breathing, still waiting, were about to join them. The man in charge wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. In fact, he looked almost sad, the kind of sadness that doesn't come from empathy, but from repetition. He had done this too many times to feel much at all, but his hands were steady. He spoke a name, maybe yours, or the one he gave you. And then he began. And in that moment, as the steel touched your skin, you realized something strange. You weren't thinking of dying. You were thinking of who might remember you, of whether your pain would become a story, or just another scream lost to the cold. Because here, being a prisoner wasn't a single moment. It was a descent, slow, deliberate, ritualized. You weren't dead, but you had already begun to disappear. And now, we step deeper into the space between punishment and performance, where the body becomes a message and pain becomes prophecy. It starts with the silence, not fear, not rage, not even pain. Silence. Before the first cut, before the ropes tighten, before the crowd gathers in a semicircle of cold breath and cautious distance, there is a hush. A sacred, almost reverent pause, as if the village is holding its breath because they know what's about to happen isn't just punishment, it's theater. In the Viking world, pain wasn't wasted. It was orchestrated, crafted, delivered with precision, not chaos. What happened to the body of a prisoner wasn't merely retribution, it was message. A warning carved in real time, with real flesh. And the audience? The entire village, children included, especially children. Because fear, to be effective, had to begin young. You sit now, eyes low, back straight, not from pride, but because you've seen what happens to those who tremble. The earth beneath you is wet with something you don't want to name. Around you, people don't whisper. They don't laugh. They just observe. And in the center stands the figure you now understand better than any god, the executor. Not always a brute, sometimes older, sometimes a woman, sometimes the chieftain himself, but always calm, always deliberate. His role is not rage, it is ritual. The crowd doesn't cry for blood. They wait to be moved, to learn, to feel. Because this event will be spoken of, recounted at firesides. Used to explain why certain rules are never broken, why certain names are never spoken aloud. It will live longer than the man who suffers. This is how order is built in a world without prisons, without bureaucracy, without long trials. Justice here is fast, public, and remembered. And that's the secret. It isn't just the pain. It's the memory of pain, the echo of a scream heard by everyone, so that no one forgets what's possible. That's what keeps the peace. Not laws carved into stone, but fear carved into minds. And so, the torture begins. Not fast. That would be wasteful. Each act is paced, like stanzas in a dark poem. A cut, a pause, a word spoken, a gesture to the gods. Sometimes even a joke, not for humor, but to remind everyone. This isn't just punishment, it's control. Ceremony, every detail matters. The angle of the blade, the smell of burning hair, the way the body shakes or refuses to. There's something deeply human in the spectacle, and deeply inhuman too. Because as you sit watching, part of you recoils. Another part leans closer. That's the paradox. You're afraid, but you can't look away. And that's exactly the point. The public nature of Viking torture wasn't incidental. It was central. Hidden pain doesn't teach. Secret punishment doesn't protect a village. But shared horror, that shapes generations. Even the location mattered. Often, executions and tortures were held in specific clearings, near ancient stones or sacred trees. The air itself seemed to carry memory. As if the ground could remember each cry, each drop of blood, and pass that memory to the roots beneath. And the children, they didn't just watch, they absorbed. They learned how to act, what lines never to cross, how quickly one could fall from friend to warning. Fear became a kind of language, a grammar of survival. You might wonder, didn't this breed trauma? Yes, and that was the point. Because a traumatized population is a loyal one, an obedient one less likely to challenge those who hold the axe. And yet, oddly, there was a kind of reverence, too. Pain was not seen as waste, nor was the one who suffered always seen as weak. Some victims became martyrs. Their endurance turned into legend, not because they won, but because they didn't break. They gave the crowd something else. Awe. You remember one. A man from the South caught stealing grain during a famine. No family, no name. He didn't plead, didn't resist. He knelt, hands bound, and when the knife came, he smiled. Not bravado, not madness, just peace. And that unsettled the village more than any scream could have. They still speak of him, not with scorn, but with a strange mixture of respect and discomfort, because he robbed the crowd of what they came for. He made the ritual his. And that's the danger, isn't it? Spectacle walks a thin line. Too much pain, and it becomes barbaric. Too little, and it loses authority. Too much emotion, and the crowd might revolt. Too little, and they might forget. So the torturer must balance, not just flesh, but fear, memory, silence. And when it's done, no one cheers. There are no victory songs, just the slow dispersal of a crowd, the sound of boots on dirt, and the stain left behind. You return home, but part of you stays there, kneeling beside the one who screamed, or didn't, smelling the smoke, seeing the blood, wondering what line, invisible and shifting, separates you from him. And the village? Safer, perhaps. Quieter, certainly, but never quite the same. This was no random cruelty. It was performance. It was warning. It was control dressed in ritual. And now we go deeper still, toward the most infamous ritual of all, where pain met legend and became myth. Oh, blood eagle, símbolo ao exagero. You've heard the name whispered, haven't you? Blood eagle. Even the syllables feel heavy. Like they shouldn't be said too loud or too close to nightfall, because this isn't just a method of execution. It's a story, a symbol, a shiver passed down through centuries. Half history, half nightmare. But tonight, let's look closer. Not with judgment, with stillness. You sit in the longhouse, the fire low. The shadows crawl like slow animals across the wooden walls. Outside, the wind moans low against the thatched roof. Someone, a skald maybe, is retelling the story. You've heard it before. Everyone has. But hearing and believing are two different things. The blood eagle, they say, was performed only in rare cases, for vengeance, for betrayal, for making the gods themselves tremble with fury. It was not justice. It was a message carved in ribs and lungs. A spectacle so brutal, so poetic in its violence, that even those who hated the Norse whispered it with a kind of horrified reverence. Here's how it goes. The prisoner is stripped, bound, laid face down. His back, broad or narrow, doesn't matter, becomes canvas. Then, the axe. 2 long cuts, from shoulder to hip. Deep, slow. The ribs are pulled outward, like wings, spread wide, not for flight, but for display. The lungs, yes, the lungs, are then tugged from the cavity, arranged delicately atop the open ribs. They say the man still breathes. They say he gurgles, soft and wet, as the cold air kisses tissue never meant to feel the wind. They say the gods watch. But they also say a lot of things. Historians argue over whether it ever really happened. Some believe it was a metaphor, misread by later writers, a poetic way of describing a cruel death. Others say it was exaggerated. The ribs might have been broken, yes, but the lungs, unlikely, and still others. They believe every word. Because what better way to terrify enemies than with a death so impossible it must be true? And you, sitting here by the fire, don't know what to believe. But the image stays, doesn't it? The wings, the red, the silence. You picture it even when you try not to. A man on his knees, another standing behind him, calm, a small blade in his hand, steady. The crowd holding its breath, not cheering, just watching. If it happened, it would have been rare, reserved for kings, traitors, oath breakers, men whose deaths needed to echo across oceans. This wasn't for the average thief. This was a ritual of unforgivable offense. But even if it didn't happen, not quite like that, its presence in the stories means something. Because sometimes what people believe is more powerful than what actually occurred. The blood eagle became a symbol of power, of cruelty, of divine vengeance. It haunted the minds of those who would dare cross the Norse. It reminded people that death here could be art. And in that way, the blood eagle did happen, over and over. Not in flesh, perhaps, but in fear, in memory. In the way it crept into dreams and shaped behavior. Because a man who fears such an end is a man who steps more carefully. You lean back now, eyes low. The fire crackles. The skald finishes his tale, voice trailing off like smoke. No one speaks. No one needs to. The image is enough. And that's the true power of the blood eagle. Not in the cutting, but in the silence that follows. Now let's step away from myth and into the steel. Into the tools that made this world's pain possible and unforgettable. O som do osso partindo. Ferramentas y técnicas. The tools aren't what you expect. They're not dripping with blood, not jagged or monstrous. In fact, they're simple. Worn handles, dulled edges from long use, blades that look more like something you'd use to trim a branch than to open a man. But that's what makes them worse, somehow. Because these aren't the weapons of war. They aren't axes meant for shields or spears for distant battles. These tools are intimate, quiet, designed not for death, but for the spaces just before it. You're in the longhouse again, but this time, you're behind the scenes. The crowd hasn't gathered yet, the fire burns low, and in the shadows, someone is preparing the kit. It's laid out like a ritual. A small, flat blade, a curved hook once used for fish, a bone saw, still stained at the hinge, hot irons glowing gently beside coals. A rope, short, thick, coarse enough to leave marks, a wooden wedge, smooth from years of being bitten. Each one has a purpose and a rhythm. Because torture here isn't chaotic, it's methodical. Every movement calculated not just for pain, but for symbolism, for memory, for control. Let's start with the blade. Small, sharp, and quiet. It opens skin like silk, clean, controlled. Enough to bleed, but not enough to kill. The goal isn't speed, it's clarity. The cut must be seen, must speak. This isn't for execution, it's for spectacle. Then the hook, curved, cruel in its indifference. It slips into muscle like it was made for it. Sometimes it was. A tool adapted from fishing, now fishing for screams instead of cod. It turns slowly, drawing out tendons, nerves, the deep, strange geography beneath the skin. The saw. Not used often, it's too final. But when used, it speaks loudly. Bone doesn't snap clean. It moans, cracks, vibrates through the air like a drum made of grief. The first sound startles the crowd. The second they expect. By the third, they're changed. And then the iron, glowing red, held by tongs older than memory. It doesn't cut. It marks, burns truth into skin, sometimes for branding, sometimes for silence. It cauterizes wounds when death must be delayed. Or it speaks in smoke, hissing words no one dares to say aloud. There's also the wedge, not a weapon, but a mercy, bitten during the worst of it, to keep teeth from breaking, tongues from being lost. It smells of old wood, of sweat soaked deep into the grain, and rope, always rope, not just for binding, but for shaping, arms twisted behind backs, legs bent at unnatural angles, necks held still so the blade can kiss just right. Rope is the sculptor's first tool. It turns people into statues of fear. And it's not just how these tools are used. It's who uses them. The executor isn't frantic, he's practiced. There's almost an artistry to it, a rhythm. A balance between too much and not enough, pain given in doses, silence measured, eyes watched. Because this isn't just about hurting, it's about transforming. The body becomes canvas, the pain becomes paint, the audience becomes witness, and you, kneeling, bound, bare, you become part of the story. Even the setting matters. Sometimes it's a stone platform, cold, rough, older than anyone remembers. Sometimes it's dirt, wet and soft, soaking up what spills. Sometimes it's the deck of a longship, blood running down to the sea. Always chosen, always remembered. And in the end, the tools are cleaned. Or not. Some say blood on the blade makes it stronger. Others believe the gods prefer iron that remembers. You've seen these tools before. Maybe not up close, maybe only in dreams. But their shapes live in the back of your mind. Because even if you never touch them, their presence shapes your world. They keep you in line. They draw the borders of what's allowed. They whisper, "Careful." The hook still hangs by the fire. And that whisper, it's louder than any scream. Now let's slow the rhythm even more. Because not all pain is fast. Some is meant to last. Let's explore what it meant when agony was sacred. There's a kind of cruelty that isn't loud. It doesn't come with broken bones or blood on snow. It comes with time. Long, stretched time. Measured in breaths, in winces, in the hours between one scream and the next. Because sometimes the pain itself was the ritual. Tonight, you're not at the center of the village. You're further out, a clearing near the trees where moss climbs rocks and time seems to move differently. This place isn't for fast justice. It's for the slow kind, the kind that leaves echoes. A man kneels in the middle of it. His hands are bound behind him, not with tight knots, but loops. Loose enough to allow circulation, tight enough to prevent escape. His face is calm, not because he is strong, but because the ordeal hasn't truly begun. This punishment is not about blood. Not yet. It's about endurance, about making every moment a test and every witness complicit. There's a fire nearby, small, controlled, not for warmth, for pacing. Someone tends it. Another watches. The torturer, calm, always, is choosing the order. Because here, the sequence matters. First comes stillness, then comes discomfort, then comes pressure, then release, not of mercy, but of control. One method begins with suspension, not high, not dramatic, just enough to lift the toes from the ground. Rope under the arms, around the chest, over a tree branch. The body hangs, not painfully, just uncomfortably. That's the point. Muscles cramp, blood slows, time dilates. After an hour, the pain is in the shoulders. After 2, in the ribs. After 3, you can't tell where it begins. The world becomes smaller. Just rope, breath, and the sound of wind. No screams yet, only breathing, louder than before. The torturer walks in circles, not threatening, just present. A reminder that relief will not come from within, that this is no test of strength, but of surrender. Another method involves weight. Stones tied to limbs. Small ones first. Just enough to strain. Then more. And more. The body doesn't snap. It sinks. It folds slowly under its own weight. A collapse without impact. It's almost poetic if it weren't so real. And there's the drip. Water, warm or cold, falling at intervals onto the same spot. Forehead, chest, hand. An innocent rhythm maddening by repetition. Not because it hurts, but because it never stops. It steals thought, turns time into torment. You might think this is mercy compared to blades. It's not, because the mind begins to betray. It tells you lies, that this will never end, that you're already broken, that no one will stop it, that maybe you deserve it. And that voice, that internal unraveling, how becomes part of the ritual. Some victims are spoken to, gently. Stories told to them between acts of discomfort. Tales of other men, of gods who suffered worse, of children watching nearby. The words aren't cruel, they're soft. And that makes them worse, because the pain is no longer from outside. It's from within, from the knowledge that the pain has a purpose, that you have become the medium for it. This is slow agony, the sacred kind. Sometimes the ordeal lasts hours, sometimes a day. In the worst tales, longer, not always ending in death. Sometimes, in release, the prisoner survives, broken but breathing, sent back to his people with marks, not just on skin, but in the way he walks, speaks, dreams. A walking warning, because the Vikings understood something. Quick pain fades. Slow pain teaches. And the village learns through you. Children don't forget the man who came back changed. Women whisper his name when arguments grow too heated. Warriors glance away when he passes, not out of shame but reverence, because he's touched something most fear too much to imagine. And you now understand that torture wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Ritual. Endurance stretched until it became myth. And now, we turn toward a stranger layer of this ritual, where pain meets belief, where gods and ghosts sit beside the fire, and even the torturer wonders, who else is watching? You're not alone. Even when your hands are bound, even when the cold bites deep and the fire cracks low in the distance, even when your breath fogs and your body shakes not from pain, but from something older. There are others here. Not visible, not fully, but you feel them. Because in the Viking world, suffering wasn't just physical. It echoed. It crossed realms. The line between punishment and spiritual warfare was thin. Some said it didn't exist at all. Tonight, in a village tucked between trees and storm, someone has been accused. Not of theft, not of betrayal, of something darker. Witchcraft, curse work, calling the wrong spirits on the wrong night. And when that happens, pain changes shape. This isn't just justice, it's purification. You're in the crowd now, watching the accused, She's not old, nor young. Her eyes are calm, disturbingly so. That's the first sign, they say. The truly guilty never beg. They smile when they should weep, or go silent when you call their name. She's bound at the wrists, but loosely. Not to restrict her, they say, but to stop whatever lives inside her from getting out. A circle is drawn, not with chalk, but with ash from the last ritual fire. Symbols pressed into the dirt, some recognizable, others old, too old, older than the gods you grew up fearing. The torturer is different this time, not just muscle and iron. He carries a pouch, feathers, stones, bone fragments wrapped in string, because this punishment isn't just for the body, it's for the soul, or the shadow beneath it. They begin not with pain, but with questions. What did you whisper on the last full moon? Why did the cows fall ill after your visit? Whose name did you write in blood? The accused doesn't answer. Not because she can't, but because answers change nothing. The ritual must proceed. It's already been decided. The pain will come, not just to extract truth, but to cleanse what truth has touched. Some believe the gods demand it. Others think it's the spirits, the old ones, the ones who were here before Odin. And some just enjoy the theater. Fire is used more here, not for burning to death. That's too crude, but to test, to expose. A red-hot rod pressed gently against skin. If it blisters, she's guilty. If it doesn't, she's guilty and protected. There's no win. Only delay. They chant softly. The crowd, not just the torturer. Words that sound like prayers but taste like curses. You feel something tighten in your chest, like the air has thickened. You're not watching punishment anymore. You're watching belief perform itself. And that's what makes this the most dangerous kind of pain, because it isn't given for a deed. It's given for an idea, for an energy someone thinks they felt, a shadow someone swears they saw, a goat that wouldn't milk, a child who didn't sleep, a fire that wouldn't start. In this world, the unexplained must be explained, and torture fills the silence. It gives shape to fear. It says, see, we acted. We didn't let darkness in. We paid the price. And what of the accused? Sometimes they confess. Not because it's true, but because they want the screaming to stop. Sometimes they die silent, and the silence speaks louder than any scream could. And sometimes they live, marked, banished, left to wander with burns on their skin and whispers at their back. And even then, the fear doesn't end. Because if she wasn't guilty, what does that say about those who tortured her? So the story changes. She was guilty. The ritual worked. The village is safe now. Everyone nods. Everyone exhales. Everyone pretends the gods were watching. But you're not so sure. Because something was watching, and you feel it still. Pain wasn't just about the body. It was about keeping balance between what is seen and what is feared. Now let's step into that fear, into the stories they rarely tell, the ones where women didn't just suffer, but wielded the knife too. You weren't expecting her, not in the center of the ritual, not with a knife in her hand, not with eyes so calm, so ancient, so certain of what must be done. But here she is, a woman, not old, not a crone from tales, hunched over a cauldron. No, tall, quiet, braided hair and calloused hands. Her cloak smells of smoke and juniper. Her voice doesn't rise above the wind. It doesn't need to. Because in this world, violence isn't always shouted. Sometimes it's passed down, like recipes or lullabies. You've heard stories that women were spared, that Viking society, brutal as it was, left torture to men, that the sacred and the savage didn't mix inside a single body. But those stories lie. In truth, women in the Viking world could hold power. Spiritual, social, domestic, and yes, ritual. And power here wasn't clean. It had edges. Sometimes ceremonial, sometimes sharp. The woman before you isn't torturing out of rage. She's performing a rite. Maybe she's a vulva, a seer, a keeper of old rites and deeper fears. Maybe she's a mother, a widow, someone wronged, or someone carrying out what her own mother once did on a night just like this one. She moves slowly, like she's done this before. Like the body before her is a text. And she is reading it. She doesn't use brute force. Her strength lies elsewhere, in stillness, in knowing how long a burn must last to scar but not kill, in knowing how shame cuts deeper than blade. She speaks sometimes, not threats, not curses, questions, soft, steady, designed not to intimidate, but to unravel. Do you remember her name? Did you mean to break that vow? Did you think no one would see? And the victim, a man, maybe, or another woman, sometimes older, sometimes barely past girlhood, tries not to answer. But it's not her blade that opens them. It's her patience. You'd think this would be rare, but in the old codes, vengeance was not gendered. Justice was not held in calloused male hands alone. A woman who lost kin could demand blood. A wife betrayed could seek humiliation, not just reparation. And when women were the accused, that's when the silence gets louder. Because women's pain was often hidden, more intimate, more imaginative. Not public spectacle always, but whispered torment, isolation, exposure, endurance stretched over days, not hours. Accused of witchcraft, she might be starved, not sliced, denied sleep, not stabbed, watched until her mind unraveled, then blamed for its unraveling. Other times, her body became message, hair cut off, a symbol of dishonor, skin branded with marks no husband would want, teeth removed, tongue injured, voice silenced, and always the eyes, the way they looked at her after. Like she was both victim and threat, proof of what happens when women stray too far from firelight. But some didn't break. Some came back stronger, harder. Some picked up the blade. And that's the story they never told you. That the hand lifting the iron wasn't always a man's. That some of the most feared interrogators were not warriors, but wives. Not berserkers, but mothers. Because pain here was inheritance. Passed down not in word, but in posture. In silence. In the way a girl watched her grandmother clean blood from a stone and didn't flinch. You sit now, by the longhouse wall, watching her. Not with fear, but with awe. Because she's not a villain. She's a mirror. And maybe that's the hardest part. Realizing that pain in this world wasn't always something done to women. Sometimes it was something they wielded. And now, we look at those who didn't flinch. The ones who met the blade and bit down. And in doing so, rewrote what it meant to suffer. Not all screams are heard. Some are swallowed. Some never come. And those are the ones that echo longest. In the Viking world, pain was expected to produce sound. Wails, cries, gasps. That was part of the ritual. a proof that the punishment had entered the body, had shattered something essential. But sometimes, the body doesn't give you that. Sometimes the soul holds its breath, and that terrifies the crowd more than any scream ever could. You sit at the edge of the clearing, the cold creeping up through your feet, watching him. A man, tied to the central post, bare from the waist up, shoulders broad but not proud, back marked but not broken. They've begun already. Shallow cuts along the ribs, a slow burn down one arm, a tight cord digging deep into his wrists. And still, nothing. Not a word, not a moan, not even a hiss. His eyes don't defy. They absorb. And he watches the torturer the way a sailor watches the sea. Calm, patient. As if he knows that this storm too will pass. This silence isn't weakness. It's defiance. A rebellion so quiet, it roars. Because in this culture, so rooted in honor and display, silence changes the rules. It shifts the power. It unsettles. The crowd begins to murmur. Children ask why he hasn't screamed. A woman whispers that perhaps the gods are protecting him. An old man looks away, not from disgust, but from something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or shame. And the torturer? He falters. Just for a moment, because every act is designed for reaction. Every cut expects music. When it doesn't come, the pain becomes invisible. And invisible pain is harder to control. So he leans closer, tries again. A deeper cut, a twist, a phrase meant to provoke. Still silence. And then maybe a smile, small, faint, a crack in the face of agony. That smile rewrites everything because it says, "You do not own me. You cannot reach me. I hurt, but I am not yours." That's when the fear turns. Not toward the man being tortured, but away from him. Back to the audience, to themselves. Because if he can endure this in silence, what does that say about them? Would they scream sooner? Would they beg? And worse, would they have ever had the strength to smile? Stories like this don't always survive in sagas. They don't fit the mold of glorious death or loud vengeance, but they survive in whispers. Tales of the man who never cried, the woman who was branded and never flinched, the boy who, when his fingers were broken, recited a prayer instead of weeping. These aren't myths. They're lessons. Because even in a world ruled by the blade, the greatest power is still your own mind. The torturer eventually finishes, not with triumph, but with frustration. The man is left breathing, bleeding, but unbeaten. And the next time punishment is given, people remember. They remember him, not because of the wounds, but because of the silence. In that silence, there was pride. There was resistance. There was something holy. You think of it now, as the wind howls low outside your home, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. And now, let's turn to another form of pain, one that leaves no blood, one that cuts not with blade, but with shame. The pain of humiliation. There's a kind of death that doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't draw blood. It doesn't break bone. It doesn't even silence the breath. But it kills, slowly, thoroughly, all the same. Tonight, the punishment is different. There are no ropes, no fire, no screams, just eyes, dozens of them watching. You are the center of the village, but not because of bravery, not because of honor. You're here to be seen, not for what you've done, but for what they've decided you are. And that is death in its own way. Because in the Viking world, shame was currency. Honor, that invisible thread connecting reputation, name, family, and memory, could be unraveled without a single wound. And once that thread was gone, you weren't just shunned. You were erased. Tonight, they humiliate you. And that here is worse than pain. They strip you, not of clothes, but of status. Your belt, gone. A sign you no longer hold rank. Your tools taken. Proof you no longer serve a purpose. Your name unspoken. As if it no longer belongs to you. And the punishment? It begins not with blows, but with words. A skald, a poet, a keeper of tales stands before the fire and tells your story, but not the one you remember. A twisted version. Your faults exaggerated, your failures made song, your cowardice woven into verse. People laugh. Not because it's funny, but because they must. Laughter, here, is obedience. And obedience keeps the shame alive. Then come the gestures. A mock helmet placed on your head, made of bark, or dung, or straw. A cloak of rags, a symbolic sword, too heavy to lift. You become theater, satire, a living warning. Some punishments go further. You might be forced to perform a task, menial, absurd. Scrub the chieftain's boots with your beard. Eat from the ground like a pig. Bark like a dog when someone snaps their fingers. None of it hurts. All of it destroys. Because the pain isn't in the act. It's in the eyes watching. The faces that used to know you. Now, they pity you. Or worse, they enjoy it. And when it ends, there's no release. No wound to bandage. Just silence, and the knowledge that you'll never walk this path the same way again. You're not exiled. You're present, and yet no longer part of anything. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest cut of all. Viking society, for all its violence, understood the deep psychology of humiliation. They knew that honor was internal and communal, that to strip it away in front of others was to unmake a person piece by piece. Some never recovered. Some left, wandering into the woods or into the sea. Some took their own lives. Others tried to earn it back, through bravery, through vengeance, through death, because shame here could only be burned clean, not erased, but overwritten with new acts, new blood, new sacrifice. And the crowd? They always watched, because public shame was a lesson, a mirror. It whispered, this could be you. And in that fear, society held. You leave the circle tonight, not broken, but hollow. You breathe. You move, but something is gone, and no one will speak of it, because silence, too, is part of the punishment. Now we shift again to a darker altar, where gods, or what passed for gods, demanded flesh. Quando os deuses exigiam carne, sacrificios humanos. The air is different tonight. It smells not of smoke or blood or sweat, but of expectation. The kind that makes the animals restless. The kind that keeps children indoors and elders quiet by the fire. Because tonight isn't about punishment. It's about offering. And what's being offered is someone like you. In the Viking world, not all deaths were personal. Some were sacred. Offered not to kings or crowds, but to gods. And the gods, they said, watched closely. You've heard the stories. That Odin once hung himself from the world tree to gain wisdom. That Thor crushed giants with a hammer that hungered for blood. That Freyr, god of fertility, could withhold harvests unless properly honored. And honor, in times of desperation, could mean flesh, human flesh. Sacrifices weren't routine. They weren't thrown around lightly. But when they happened, oh, they echoed. through time, through bone, through story. You're standing now in a grove. Sacred trees encircle a clearing. Some still bear offerings, bones, feathers, beads blackened by weather and prayer. The soil here is soft, too soft, as if it remembers what's been buried, as if it resists your step. At the center stands a stone altar, crude, stained, ancient, and beside it, a figure robed in fur and shadow, the Gothi, priest, medium, keeper of the gods' hunger. Tonight, the village has gathered, not in anger, but in awe. Crops have failed, storms have lingered, disease has touched even the chieftain's home. Something must be done. And so, they chose someone. Maybe a slave, maybe a criminal, maybe a volunteer. Yes, sometimes people offered themselves to gain honor, to protect a family, to earn passage to Valhalla not through war, but through sacrifice. The ritual begins with silence, not fear, reverence. The Gothi circles the altar, a chant begins. Old words, words not even the elders fully understand. The language of before, of the gods' raw breath. The victim is dressed in white, not for purity, for visibility, so that all may see, so that blood, when it comes, is not mistaken for shadow. Hands are bound, but not tightly. There is no struggle. The sacrifice does not scream, because this isn't punishment. It's gift. A torch is lit, passed from elder to child. The circle of fire grows. It dances along the edge of the grove, casting light and long-reaching shadows. And then the blade, simple, sharp, ceremonial, held not with hatred, but with purpose. The cut is swift, sometimes at the throat, sometimes at the chest. Sometimes in older rites, the heart is removed, still beating, offered to the sky, to the earth, to the roots below. There are no cheers, no chants, only the sound of wind through trees, of blood meeting soil, of breath fading. And afterward, the body is buried beneath the altar, or offered to water, or hung from a tree, so that Odin, who once hung himself for wisdom, may recognize the gift and smile. And the village, they return to life, with hope, with fear, with the knowledge that they have done what they must. And you, watching, you wonder, was this death chosen freely or demanded quietly? Does the sacrifice rest in honor or haunt in silence? The line, again, is blurred because belief justifies. And in that belief, pain becomes holy. You walk away with more questions than answers. And now we turn to a quieter cruelty. No altar, no fire, just wind and time. And the kind of punishment that doesn't kill fast, but starves the soul. There's no door, no bars, no cell, just wind and cold. And a silence that deepens with every breath. Because sometimes, in the Viking world, the most effective prison wasn't built with stone, but with absence. You've been sentenced, not to death, not to torture, but to something quieter and in some ways worse. You've been cast out, exiled, left beyond the warmth of the longhouse, beyond the smoke of the village, left to the winter. This isn't the winter of stories. Not gentle snow falling in silence, not cozy fires and hot broth and furs pulled tight. This is the other winter, the one that bites, that starves, that watches. You're given some supplies, just enough to avoid blame, a skin of water, a heel of bread, a dull knife, maybe a blanket if someone in the village felt merciful. And then they stop looking at you. Because once you're out there, beyond the tree line, you're already half gone. You try to walk at first, to find shelter. But the wind takes your thoughts. And the cold has claws. It climbs inside your boots, turns your toes to stone. It wraps around your ribs and waits. You find a hollow under a fallen tree. Shelter of sorts. It's wet. The moss is frozen. You shiver not just from cold, but from memory. And because back in the village, there was heat, laughter, food. Now, every sound is hostile. The crack of a twig, the distant howl of something four-legged, your own stomach turning against you. This isn't survival. This is slow erasure. Exile wasn't always official. Sometimes it was passive. You weren't told to go, you just weren't welcome to stay. No one would feed you. No one would answer when you spoke. Your name vanished from conversation. And in a world built on kinship, on bonds stronger than rope, that silence kills. Some exiles came back, not in body, but as stories. A man seen walking the cliffs alone, muttering to gods. A woman who returned in spring, eyes vacant, hair white with frost. A boy found frozen, curled like an unborn child, still clutching a wooden charm. Others weren't found at all. And in the village, when the fire crackled just right and the wind blew in from the forest, someone might murmur, he's still out there, still walking, still cold, because exile in this world was a death without closure, a punishment that let nature do the cutting, let the mind do the bleeding. Some begged for torture instead, for fire, for pain with a face. Because pain, at least, talks to you. But the cold just listens, and it's a terrible listener. You lie now in your hollow, breath shallow, thoughts scattering. You remember warmth. You remember touch. You remember a time when someone said your name with kindness. And now? Now the snow covers your footprints, as if you were never here, and the wind moves on. But we won't, because next we follow the sound, not of wind, but of screams. And what happens to a village when those screams become background noise? At first it startles you. The scream, sharp, high, jagged with panic. It tears through the morning fog like a hawk through feathers. Everyone hears it. Everyone pauses, but no one runs. No one asks. No one speaks. Because here, that sound is not news. It's rhythm. In Viking villages where punishment lived in the open, the sounds of pain became part of the landscape. Not always constant, but frequent enough to be recognized, internalized, tolerated. That first time you heard it, you dropped your tools. Your body tensed. Your thoughts spun. Now your hands keep working, because the scream isn't yours, because it will end soon. Because if you stopped every time, nothing would ever get done. This is the silence after. A heavy, knowing quiet that wraps itself around the thatched roofs and narrow paths. Children stop their play. The baker sets down his dough. Even the dogs grow still. And then the world resumes. Chickens cluck. Hammers ring. Feet press into wet dirt. The village breathes again. It didn't always used to be like this. There was a time when a scream cracked open the day like thunder. When people whispered about it hours later. When someone lit a fire too early, just to feel safe again. But repetition rewires the mind. You can get used to almost anything. even the pain of others, especially when that pain keeps you safe. The sound of torture came in many forms. Not always a scream, sometimes a cough, wet, struggling, low. Sometimes a prayer, broken mid-sentence. Sometimes laughter, the worst kind. The laughter of someone unraveling, of someone who's stepped out of their own body and is watching the rest from above. That laughter stays longer than any scream. It sneaks into your dreams. It waits in the spaces between thoughts. Mothers told children, "Be quiet or you'll end up like him." Fathers grunted, "Did you hear what she did? Deserved it." And everyone listened, because sound, here, was story. A single cry could speak volumes. Say, "A line was crossed." Say, "That family won't make that mistake again." Say, "You better stay quiet when the chieftain speaks." Even the location of the sound mattered. Some villages had a designated space, a punishment field, a platform, a stone. The screams came from there, predictably, like a rooster's crow or a smith's hammer. Other times it was more intimate. A scream behind a longhouse, a thud from the forest's edge, a wail cut short. And in the spaces between, the villagers developed a strange skill, the ability to not hear. Selective silence, the mind's own defense. You learn to measure. Is that a cry for help? Or just part of justice? Was that voice young or old? Do I know them? And if you do, you go quiet. Because knowing makes it harder. Because the moment you feel, you become vulnerable. So you press your feelings into your teeth. You keep your eyes down. And when the scream ends, you say nothing. But at night, when the fire dies and the wind speaks soft through the thatch, you remember, not the scream itself, but the silence that followed. Because in that silence, something changed. A name forgotten, a line crossed, a person erased, and the village, it remains, quieter, stronger, colder. And now we turn to an even stranger space, a place where the pain was paired with celebration, where death met dance, and agony joined the feast. The drums are already beating, low and steady, like a heartbeat beneath the snow. Tonight is a feast night. The longhouse glows with firelight. Laughter echoes from open doors. The smell of meat, thick and salted, rolls through the air like smoke from the gods themselves. And yet, at the center of it all, there is a man on his knees, bound, waiting. You wonder, perhaps, if he feels it too. The strange tension in the air, the way joy and fear pull at the same thread, the way celebration and cruelty sit not opposite each other, but side by side. Because in the Viking world, death didn't always come in darkness. Sometimes it came with music, with mead, with cheering, not as punishment, but as punctuation. Tonight, someone is being honored, a birth, a victory in battle, the first harvest of the season. And to mark the moment, a life will end. Not just any life, a chosen one. Maybe it's a slave, a prisoner of war, someone who stole, someone whose death, it is said, will cleanse the joy, will bless the season, will give the gods something to chew on while the village dances. It begins subtly. The feast swells. Songs are sung. The horns clink. But eyes, some, drift to the figure kneeling outside the firelight. The children don't know. Not yet. They play. They chase each other with bones and laughter. But the adults do. Because this is part of the rhythm. This is tradition. When the fire reaches its peak, when the drums change tempo, that's the signal. And the crowd shifts, slowly. They make space, they hush. And the man, the sacrifice, is brought forward. He's not mocked, not tonight. He's dressed in ritual cloth, his face painted with ash or wine or ochre. He is stood before the altar, or the central post, or sometimes just a flat stone carved with runes. And then the words, not prayers exactly, but something close, a chant, a declaration, a naming, and then the act. It may be a cut across the chest, a blade beneath the ribs, a swift slice across the throat, or, in darker stories, a more elaborate end, one meant not to kill quickly, but to remind the gods that joy must be paid for. And as the blood falls, the feast continues. Not with horror, but with rhythm. Some say the blood blesses the soil. Others say it keeps the dead from growing jealous. Some believe the scream, if there is one, carries messages to the gods faster than prayer ever could. And the children? They look. They learn. They understand that happiness and pain are cousins, that every toast carries a shadow. You sip your mead. You don't smile, but you don't look away either, because this is the way things are. In a world where death is near, always, why not invite it to dinner? And so, the music plays, the fire roars, and somewhere behind it all, someone breathes their last breath while the village laughs. Not out of cruelty, but because somehow this is tradition. And next we'll turn to something quieter, but no less permanent. The marks pain leaves behind, etched into skin like memory into snow. Some wounds don't bleed. They settle. They stay. They speak long after the blade has cooled, long after the crowd has forgotten the scream. These wounds are intentional. Tonight, you're not watching a man die. You're watching him change. The punishment isn't execution. It isn't exile. It's something more permanent. Something that walks with him for the rest of his days. That announces his shame or his survival with every step he takes. It's a mark. Not decorative, not celebratory, but punishment made visible. In the Viking world, marking the body was a form of control, one that didn't end with the ritual. It began there. You're in the clearing now. A man stands before the chieftain, not tied, not gagged. His crimes have been spoken, his guilt accepted or imposed, and the punishment, they say, will be lasting. The tool is not a blade this time, but a brand. A rod pulled from fire, its tip glowing orange. It smells of iron and smoke and memory. Two men hold the accused's arms. Not tightly, just enough to steady the skin. The mark is pressed to the flesh. Not long, just enough. The sound is worse than a scream, a hiss, a crackle, the sizzle of living skin turned memory. And then, the smell. It stays with you longer than the image. Later, the wound becomes scar, raised, shiny, a shape all can read. Some marks mean theft, others, betrayal. Still others, simply that this man once stood in that circle, once felt the fire, once failed, and now he carries it. Others were cut instead, a slash across the face, a line through the eyebrow, an ear removed, a finger, a piece of the nose, not for pain's sake, but for identification, so that no matter where he went, the body would tell the story. The body becomes a scroll. And in some cases, the punishment was the message. A man who lied with his tongue might lose it. A woman who seduced the wrong man might be branded across the chest. A warrior who fled in battle might wear a carved word on his back, one he could never reach, never remove. Some marks faded with time. Others were kept raw, picked at, reburned, because the scar wasn't for healing. It was for remembering, and society remembered. Not just out of cruelty, but out of structure. The mark meant this person cannot be trusted, or this person has paid, or in some strange cases, this person is strong enough to have survived. Because in rare moments, these marks became badges, symbols not of shame, but of endurance. Some wore them with pride, others hid them forever. But none forgot. And children, they learned what each shape meant. That man's cheek, burned for theft. That woman's hand, cut for heresy. That scar across the throat, a failed hanging. He lived. They saw. They pointed. They asked. And in the asking, the system endured. Pain here wasn't just felt. It was worn. Because in a world where memory fades, skin remembers. And now, we trace that memory one step further, beyond the body, into the bloodline. Because pain, sometimes, isn't personal. It's inherited. It didn't end with him. The man who screamed, the woman who bled, the child who watched from the shadows, eyes wide, fists clenched. Because in the Viking world, pain didn't stop when the wound closed. It moved, like blood, like breath. It passed from father to son, from sister to brother. Not as curse, but as duty. Tonight the fire burns low in the longhouse. The meal has been eaten. The children pretend to sleep. And the old one, the matriarch, the uncle, the warrior with more scars than teeth, begins to speak. Not loudly, not with flair, just a name. Spoken with the weight of decades. The name of the man who hurt your blood. He's gone now, maybe. Or old, or protected. Doesn't matter. Because vengeance in this world is not about balance. It's about memory. And memory never forgets pain. You were a child when it happened. You remember the knock at the door, the silence that followed, the smell of burning hair, the long days when no one said her name. Now, you're grown. And the fire is in your hands. Because revenge here isn't rage, it's ritual. There are rules. You don't act in haste. You don't shout your intent. You watch. You wait. Because when you strike, it must be clear. It must be lasting. It must leave a mark. Sometimes you don't even kill them. You scar them. The same way they scarred yours. If they burned your mother, you brand their son. If they broke your brother's legs, you bind theirs until the same bones crack. If they humiliated your kin in public, you do it back. Worse, deeper, louder. It's not madness. It's justice, inherited. And in this way, torture becomes generational. A language passed through years, whispers sharpened into knives, grief repurposed into punishment. Some families are known for it. Not warriors or avengers, not kings like rememberers. They hold grudges like heirlooms, teach them like prayers. Never forget what was done to us. When the moment comes, act clean, act true, act so they'll never forget. And they don't. Because the scars now live in multiple bodies. One from the past, one from today, one waiting for tomorrow. Some try to break the cycle. They walk away. Marry into peace, refuse to pass on the names. But stories are stubborn. and pain clings. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one insult, one fire, one drunken boast, and the embers flare again. And so it continues. The punishment given in one lifetime becomes the reason for torture in the next. No one remembers how it started, only how it felt. And that is enough. Because in the Viking world, legacy wasn't gold or land. It was grudge. It was name. It was the way your pain lived on, through someone else's hand. Now, we leave the realm of blood and memory and step into something stranger. What happens when the records vanish, but the stories refuse to die? You're still breathing. The ropes are gone. The fire is out. The wound, whatever form it took, is now part of you. Not just on the skin, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere sleep won't reach. You walked away. Or they let you crawl. Or someone pulled you from the mud. Or maybe they forgot to finish what they started. But you're alive. And in the Viking world, that makes you rare. Most didn't survive torture. Not because it always killed them, but because survival itself was undesired. A clean end was simpler. A scream followed by silence, a body returned to the ground, and memory handled by the gods. But you are the after. And now, nothing feels the same. You return to the village, or what's left of it. The same paths, the same trees, the same faces, half familiar. But they don't look at you like before. Some turn away. Some pretend not to recognize you. A few stare, not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity, because they don't know who you are now. And truth be told, neither do you. The body heals somewhat. The bruises fade, the cuts scab, then scar. The voice returns, quieter but steady. But inside, everything is louder. You wake at odd hours. You flinch at soft sounds. You taste metal when you chew. And sometimes when the wind moves just right, you smell the moment again. The fire, the blood, the silence between screams. No one talks about it, not to you, because survival in this world isn't always celebrated. It's complicated. Were you spared? Did you betray someone to walk free? Did the gods intervene? Was your punishment interrupted? People ask without asking. They gesture. They whisper when your back is turned. But no one asks. And so you become something else. Not hero, not victim. Something between. You see things more clearly now. The way people avoid eye contact. The way the children pause when you enter the room. The way elders stop their stories when you sit too close. You're not part of the village anymore. Not fully. You're something they've filed away under exception. You carry the memory they wish had stayed buried. Some survivors run. They seek new villages, new names, new gods. They marry into forgetfulness. They become someone else. Someone who didn't scream, didn't bleed, didn't remember. Others embrace it. They retell the story. They show the scars. They laugh too loudly at pain. They sit too close to the fire. And some, a rare few, become the very thing that once held the knife. Because once you've endured enough pain, inflicting it can feel like taking back power. But you still choose. Each day, each breath, you choose how to carry it. Whether to bury it in silence or wear it like armor. You survived, and that makes you dangerous. Because a world that uses pain to control has no answer for someone who walked through it and kept going. So now, you walk, not because you're free, but because you remember. And remembering is its own kind of power. Next, we go back, not to the survivors, but to the silence in the records, to what was left out, and why that matters. There are pages missing, not torn, just never written. When you look into the chronicles of the Viking Age, the sagas, the rune stones, the letters of frightened monks, there are long passages on ships, battles, trade, gods. But pain? Pain lives between the lines. You search for descriptions. You look for names, for dates, for how often the blood ran, how loud the screams were, how many were marked or broken or buried beneath sacred groves. But all you find is silence. It's not that it didn't happen. It's that no one wrote it down. Or if they did, those words didn't survive, burned in monastery fires, lost in translation, buried in snow, deemed unworthy of ink. And yet the stories remain. Whispers in the margins. Songs that don't rhyme. Names half remembered. Bones pulled from bogs, bearing marks that no weapon of war could have made. Pain leaves traces, even when paper forgets. A skeleton with wrists worn raw by rope, a jaw broken clean through with no signs of healing. A ribcage spread wider than it should, as if something had been forced out. These are the footnotes of cruelty, unwritten, but undeniable. And in that absence, we're left to wonder. Were the scribes afraid to name what they saw? Did they think pain was too common to record, or too shameful? Or maybe they thought they were protecting someone, the reader, the victim, themselves. So the stories shifted. Pain became metaphor. Execution became honor. Ritual became myth. And the real suffering? It evaporated into legend. But legends carry shadows. The blood eagle, debated, disbelieved, still haunts us because something inspired it. The quiet terror of exile, rarely mentioned, can still be felt in a single sentence. He walked into the forest and did not return. The branded faces, the missing fingers, the songs that change key just before the moment of truth. We are left to read between the lines, to trust the earth more than the page. Because sometimes bones remember what the ink refused to say. Archaeology becomes our storyteller. The blackened fire pits in groves far from farms. The broken skulls arranged not in graves, but in display. The amulets found in the mouths of the dead, as if someone tried to trap the scream before it could escape. And when we can't explain, we imagine. And imagination here is not wild. It's forensic. It's necessary. We build the stories they refuse to tell, not to sensationalize, but to witness, to acknowledge that pain, even when denied, demands memory. And so we remember, not with dates, not with certainty, but with empathy, because in that silence, someone once screamed. And in the space where no ink dared flow, someone endured. Next, we'll look at what survives in our hands, not just in bones or tales, but in objects. The tools, the evidence, the quiet relics of terror. It's one thing to hear the stories, another to see what remains. To feel the weight of a rusted hook in your palm, to smell the iron still etched with faint traces of ash and blood, to realize the tools weren't made to kill, but to change, not just bodies, fates. You're in a museum now, or maybe an excavation site. The ground is soft with time. There's a display carefully arranged. Ropes coiled like sleeping snakes. Wooden wedges worn by teeth. A blade short, curved, undecorated, silent, and beside it, a sign. Function unknown. But is it? We don't always know what these objects did. But sometimes, the shape is enough. A bone awl, sharpened too precisely. An iron rod with a hook that serves no farming purpose. A mask, leather with slots for breathing, but none for seeing. You feel it in your chest. This was meant for pain. Historians argue. They tread carefully. They cite context, climate contamination. They question their own questions. Because no one wants to say, this was used to hurt someone without proof. And pain rarely fossilizes, but some objects speak too loudly to ignore. In a peat bog, a wooden frame shaped to hold arms wide and legs apart, buried near an altar stone. In a riverside village, a brand with a rune not found in any name, only in curses. In a coastal settlement, a hollowed cow horn, its tip smoothed by lips, used, perhaps, to force feed or to muffle sound. And then there's the leather, strips of it, not for clothing, not for riding, but for binding. Soaked, stretched, twisted tight, strong, flexible, reusable. We've found them under floorboards, behind hearths, hidden. Why? Because tools of punishment weren't always destroyed. They were kept as symbols, as warnings, or, in some cases, as family legacy. A knife passed down, a brand inherited, not for pride, for continuity. Because even pain has lineage, and the line between farmer's tool and torturer's device, sometimes it's just intention. A hammer can build or break. A rope can pull a cart or silence a voice. It depends on the hand. And some hands left stains, even the objects that deny it. The tools cleaned carefully, the blades wrapped in cloth, the ones marked unknown in glass displays. They know, they remember, and so do we, if we're quiet enough. If we listen not just to the sagas, but to the metal, to the wood, to the grain of a handle worn smooth by repetition. Because tools, unlike stories, don't exaggerate. They don't forget. They don't flinch. They endure. And now, we arrive at the end, not of pain, but of understanding. What did all of this mean? Was it cruelty, order, madness, or something achingly human? Let's walk together one last time into the heart of that question. You've made it to the end, not of the story, but of the path through it. And here, in this dim light, with the fire low and the room still, the question rises. Was it all real? The screams, the blades, the wings of blood, the silence that punished more than any iron ever could? Or was it myth, embellishment, something whispered so many times it turned into truth? The answer, perhaps, is both. Because the Viking world wasn't only brutality, it was structure, community, a place where the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the rules. And those rules weren't kept with paper or promises. They were kept with pain. Pain as theater. Pain as memory. Pain as prayer. But does that make them monsters? Maybe not. Because when you look closer, what do you see? People trying to survive, to create order in chaos, to make meaning where there was none. A society that had no courtrooms, only circles of witnesses. No prisons, only exile, or marks, or the fire. No mental health, only the scream and what came after. They didn't invent cruelty. They inherited it, refined it, wrapped it in ritual, and set it before the gods, hoping, perhaps, that divine silence meant approval. And you watched it unfold, one breath at a time, from the cold stones of the execution grove to the quiet shame of public mockery, to the rare and terrible silence of those who did not break. You walked with them, felt the iron cool, the rope tighten, the fire dim. And now, here in the hush after the last word, you're different too. Not broken, but aware, because history isn't always clean. It's not made of dates and declarations. Sometimes it's made of bruises, of voices lost, of hands that held the knife and those that bore it. Perhaps by knowing their pain, ours feels a little smaller or a little more bearable. Perhaps by witnessing how they endured, we remember that we can endure too. Not through violence, but through story, through memory, through the quiet courage of saying, that happened. I see it now. And if you've felt unsettled, that's okay. If you felt quieted, even better, because sleep doesn't always come from peace. Sometimes it comes from truth, from knowing that even in the darkest chapters, there was structure, there was reason, there was humanity, even in the pain. So now, as you lie back and let the quiet take you, know this. You've walked with ghosts, and they walk a little quieter now. The village is quiet again. The fire crackles, but no one gathers too close. The goats bleat. The wind moves through the trees like a whisper that's forgotten its words. Someone coughs. Someone chops wood. But no one talks about what happened yesterday. The screams are gone. But the echo lingers. Because even in a world that normalizes pain, that wraps cruelty in ritual and calls it justice, the mind remembers. And what comes after the blade, after the fire, after the performance of control, is just as powerful. It's called absence, and you feel it everywhere. In the spot where someone used to sit during meals, in the hesitation before lighting the communal fire, in the way people pause when a name is almost spoken, then swallow it like something bitter, because torture didn't just affect the one who screamed. It rewrote the script for everyone. Tonight, you're at the edge of the longhouse. The feast is quiet, not solemn, just less. Less laughter, less mead, less eye contact. Like someone has removed a color from the world. Children are quieter. Mothers hold them tighter. And the elders, who've seen this before, know not to fill the silence too quickly, because there's something sacred in not speaking right away. The trauma, collective, communal, needs space to settle, to root itself, to whisper lessons in private. Even the land responds. The clearing where the ritual took place is avoided. Not officially. No one says it's forbidden. But no one goes. Not for days. Sometimes longer. The birds don't sing there. Or maybe they do, but softer. As if they too are remembering, and in the homes of those who watched, or worse, who cheered, there's a kind of guilt. Not always acknowledged, but worn in the way they stir soup or lace their boots more slowly in the morning. Because witnessing pain, even sanctioned pain, changes something in you. The children play differently now. Their games are darker. One pretends to be the chieftain. Another is tied to a tree with thin ropes of bark. Someone cries, for real. And suddenly, the game stops. Too real, too soon. And the mothers rush in, not just to stop the game, but to stop the memory from deepening. Because trauma is a quiet inheritance. It doesn't arrive with words. It comes in reactions, in what you don't say, in what you flinch at, in how early you close the door at night. The person who suffered may be gone, but their absence shapes the map of every morning that follows. You change how you move. You avoid saying things that once seemed harmless. You carry yourself differently when the chieftain passes. You wake earlier, just in case. Even the sky seems to remember. The clouds hang heavier. The frost lingers longer on the grass. And when a visitor comes from another village, no one tells them what happened. They'll figure it out by how people look at the fire, by how they lower their voices when laughter gets too loud. Grief isn't always loud, and neither is fear. Sometimes it's just the way a village changes tempo. And that rhythm, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But rebuild, it does. Because survival isn't just living. It's adjusting. And slowly, so slowly, the village breathes again. New stories begin. New names are spoken. The games become lighter. But somewhere, in the dirt beneath the clearing, the memory waits. Not as a ghost, not as a curse, just as a presence. A soft echo in the stillest part of the night. And next, we turn to those for whom even pain was not enough. Those marked not just by what they endured, you thought pain was enough. That after the screaming stopped, after the smoke rose and settled, after the body was broken and marked, there would be closure. Redemption, maybe. Or at least reintegration. But not everyone gets to return. In the Viking world, some people, even after enduring the worst, remained untouchable. Not because they didn't suffer, but because their suffering wasn't seen as enough. Tonight, you watch from the shadows as one of them walks through the village. Slowly, shoulders hunched not from cold, but from memory. No one calls out. No one offers bread. A door closes just as he passes. He's not a criminal anymore. He paid. The gods were satisfied, but the people weren't. Because sometimes pain doesn't cleanse, it stains. His name was spoken at the ritual, loudly. The chants were clear. The blade did what it was meant to do, and afterward, the elders nodded. The punishment was done, but the whispering never stopped. Some sins, they say, go too deep. Some betrayals echo too loud. Some scars aren't enough. You see it in the small things. No one sits next to him at meals. His share of meat is always smaller. When he speaks, people nod, but don't reply. He's there, but not with them. The intercaval, marked not just on the body, but in reputation. A ghost in daylight. And he's not the only one. Sometimes it's a woman, branded for sleeping with someone from another clan, whipped for speaking against the Gadi. Her wounds healed, her shame public, but still, no one visits. Her house is clean, but always empty. The exile that isn't called exile, a punishment that continues quietly under the skin of society. And worse, the children learn. They see how she's avoided, how he's never chosen for hunts or counsel. They internalize it, replicate it, pass it on, because every culture has its outgrowths, its boundary keepers, its reminders of what not to become. And when pain doesn't erase the past, it cements it. You wonder if they ever forget. The ones who watch, the ones who remember not just the act, but how little they were willing to forgive. It's not always cruelty. Sometimes it's fear. That if they accept him again, his shadow might fall on them. that if they embrace her, they too might be marked. So they retreat. They stay safe. And in doing so, they perpetuate. And what about the intacaves? Some grow quiet. They work hard. They shrink into routines. They live long lives without laughter. Others turn bitter. They whisper curses at night. They stop trying. And some, a few, embrace it. They walk tall. They make their shame into armor. They become prophets, madmen, lone wolves. Not part of the pack, but unforgettable. And isn't that a kind of power too? To endure and to remain. To wear your pain not as a plea, but as a flag. These are the stories no one tells at feasts because they remind us of how conditional forgiveness can be, of how suffering, even ritualized, doesn't always bring salvation, and that sometimes a scar is just a scar. Next, we close this long journey, not with blood, not with screams, but with a quiet trace of what's left, the things they left behind in us. Not every legacy is carved in stone. Some arrive quiet, unseen, inherited not through blood, but through rhythm, through the way we judge, through the way we punish, through the stories we still tell when someone crosses the line. The Viking world is long gone. Its longhouses have collapsed. Its gods sleep beneath centuries of dust. But some things remain. Tonight, you sit not by the fire of a chieftain's hall, but under electric light, the hum of distant noise outside your window, a phone on the table, a world supposedly modern, and yet you remember the shame that still follows some names. The way society marks people not with brands, but with silence, with laughter at the wrong time, with looks that linger just long enough. We no longer use hooks, but we still have rituals, public call-outs, ceremonies of humiliation, social exiles without ropes, without fires, just absence. And don't we still measure who's clean enough to rejoin the group? Think of the headlines, the scandals, the apologies demanded in choreographed tones, the price of air not being pain, but forgetting. We inherited more than we like to admit. We don't call them sacrifices anymore, but some still give themselves to protect others. Some are still made into symbols, not for what they did, but for what we want to prove. Control still wears a ceremonial cloak. It just looks different now. We no longer chant in circles, but the algorithms do. They decide what echoes and what vanishes. And branding, it never really stopped. It moved from skin to screen, a mark that can be seen by thousands, shared in seconds and never unseen. But it's not all darkness, because memory, even painful, can become wisdom. Knowing how punishment once worked, how shame was once curated, how pain once built empires of silence gives us power to choose differently, to question, to soften, even when justice is necessary. Perhaps the greatest gift they left us was not steel or saga, but the reminder that pain shapes, that silence speaks, that cruelty, once ritualized, becomes invisible and stays. But so pot de compexon. You finish your night not with fear, but with perspective. You've walked through their shadows. You've heard their echoes. And now, in the stillness of your room, you carry their story not as a warning, but as a mirror. Because in every civilization, ancient or digital, the question returns. Who do we punish? How? And for whose benefit? And if you've stayed this long, if you've breathed through each section, If you've allowed yourself to feel rather than judge, then perhaps you, too, are part of the quiet resistance, a different kind of legacy. One not carved in bone or fire, but in reflection. You turn off the light. You settle into your bed, and somewhere, deep in the folds of memory and myth, a blade is set down. A scream fades. A story ends. Gently. The forge is cold now. The screams, imagined, remembered, or reconstructed, have fallen silent. The ropes, the fire, the blades, the silence entrecortado pela dor estão longe. Ou talvez estejam apenas quietos, adormecidos sob a superfície do tempo. You are here, still, breathing. And that, em si, já é milagre suficiente. This story was never just about Vikings. Not really. It was about fear, about structure, about how far people go, not just to survive, but to control, to restore order where chaos knocks like wind against a door half closed. But also, it was about endurance, because under every ritual of Dior, there was uma lógica, uma vontade quase desesperada de não desaparecer. And you know that feeling, don't you? The way life pulls, sometimes, at your edges. The pressure of days que nunca desaceleram. The culpa por estar cansado. The silêncio que chega quando as luzes se apagam e o corpo ainda pulsa. That's why you're here. Not to learn dates or memorizar métodos, but to sentir, mesmo que devagar, mesmo que com hesitação, que as dores do passado têm algo a dizer sobre as suas. No, you were never tied to a tree, never branded before a crowd, never silenced by fogo ou neve. But you know how it, because punishment is no longer espectáculo com multidões. Now, it's more quiet, more internal, mais invisível, but still sharp. The need to perform, to belong, to show you that even in eras brutais, there were pessoas, just like you. And in the silence between one ritual and another, in the mornings after the punishment, in villages rebuilt with care, another form of strength would emerge. Forgiveness, resilience, a strange kind of hope. Yes, some were forgotten, others forgiven, and a few transformed. But all of them left something behind, even if only an echo. You allowed those echoes to reach you, slowly, gently. And maybe now, with the lights off and the world slowing down outside, you can realize you survived something too. Some modern form of torture, some invisible system of demands, some weight no one saw, but that you carried anyway. And you're here, whole, breathing. That's your story, and it's worth telling. In Viking ritual, after the fire was extinguished, there was a moment of waiting. No one spoke. They just sat or walked in small circles. They waited for the silence to settle. That too was part of the ritual. This pause. So take it now. Let it wash over you. Let the story lie beside you. Not as a burden, but as a reminder that human beings have always searched for meaning, even in suffering. Let your mind find, in this space, a small harbor of rest. And if sleep comes, let it come as a gift. Not as escape, but as a beginning. Because when the iron cools, the time begins. And this calm, slow, nighttime moment can be yours. You're not alone. This video was made for that. To be company when the world asks too much. To be a voice when everything is too quiet. To remind you that even in the darkest chapters of history, there were people. And between screams and silences, they still dreamed of simple things. Peace, warm bread, gentle eyes, the right to exist without fear. That dream didn't die. It made its way here to you. And maybe as you sleep tonight, you'll carry it forward, not as a burden, but as a flame, soft, slow, steady. If you made it this far, thank you. From the depth of this voice to the quiet corner of your room, thank you for listening, for feeling, for remembering that stories matter, not because they are perfect, but because they are human, just like you. So now, let go. Let the night claim you. Let the weight of every word dissolve. Tomorrow will come, but for now, sleep. And when you wake, carry with you the lightness of having touched the past with present eyes and a heart that still beats. There's a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of fear, not the one that follows pain, but the one that wraps itself around you gently, like a blanket still warm from the fire. You're not in a Viking village anymore. You're not kneeling. You're not bound. You're just here. No one's watching. No one's demanding. There's nothing left to prove. Only the hush of your own breath, the soft rhythm of your heart, the quiet kindness of allowing yourself to pause. And maybe that's the rarest ritual of all. To stop. To say, enough for today. To whisper to yourself, not orders, not expectations, but something simple. I made it. I'm still here. The stories you've just walked through, brutal, poetic, aching with memory, are done now. They've lived their purpose. They showed you that the past was never silent. It simply needed a voice. And for a while, you became that voice's listener. But now it's your turn to listen to the silence inside you. Not the one that fears, but the one that heals. Imagine for a moment that you are by the sea. Not a wild sea, a still one. The kind that mirrors the sky. The kind that doesn't speak unless spoken to. You sit by the shore. The sand is cold, but not cruel. The wind smells of salt and old stories. And behind you, everything else waits. You don't have to move. You don't have to think. You only need to exist. And in this moment, that's more than enough. Because life, real life that doesn't demand performance, it asks only for presence. So let your muscles soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breath fall into a slower rhythm. And if your thoughts try to race, let them pass. They're not chains. They're just clouds. You've done more than you know, simply by feeling the weight of those ancient voices, feeling the tension in your shoulders, feeling the quiet need to just rest. That's your body asking for peace. And peace doesn't need permission. It needs space. This space, now. If the world felt too fast today, slow it. If it felt too loud, mute it. You have that power. And it doesn't come from dominance. It doesn't come from perfection. It comes from noticing, from saying, this is mine. This breath, this pause, this night. As the last embers of this story fade, know this. You're not less for being tired. You're not broken for needing softness. You're not weak for seeking quiet. You're human. And humans, since the very beginning, have told stories to feel safe, to make sense of chaos, to fall asleep not in fear, but in connection. Tonight, that's what this was. Not just history, but company. So now, let the final light dim. Let your thoughts blur. Let your body sink into the mattress like snow into stone. And if dreams come, let them be kind. Let them carry echoes, not of pain, but of your own strength. Not the kind forged by fire, but the kind that stays, even when everything else goes quiet. You've walked far. Now you rest. And the world, it can wait. Sleep well.